They tell you your children are a mirror of yourself. That night, under the amber lights of a restaurant I never wanted to enter, I prayed to God that the mirror was lying. My name is Lutgarda. I am 72 years old. My hands are rough from 40 years of work, and my heart has been stitched back together more times than I can count. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own son looked at me like I was furniture. Old furniture. The kind you push into a corner because it doesn't match the new decor. I am not a fragile woman. I am not some weeping widow looking for pity on a park bench. I divorced my husband 40 years ago, back when a woman choosing freedom over a wedding ring was treated like a crime. I built a textile empire out of nothing, out of blistered fingers and sleepless nights. I raised my only son, Rogelio, on the sweat of my back, and I never asked him for a single thing in return. Except respect. Respect. That was the one currency I demanded. And it turned out to be a currency my son had stopped paying a long time ago. It started with a phone call. 2 days before my granddaughter Valentina's 7th birthday, Rogelio called me with that rushed voice he only used when he wanted something, or when he was hiding something. He told me the party would be an exclusive dinner at Le Jardin, the fanciest restaurant in the city. The kind of place where the dishes have French names nobody can pronounce, and the portions are so small they feel like an insult to hunger itself. "Dress elegant, Mom," he said, not even asking how I was doing. "Important people are coming. Partners from the firm. Investors. I need to look good." I hung up the phone with a bitter taste in my mouth. Look good. Was I, his mother, the woman who paid for his law degree by selling fabric until my fingers bled? Was I a stain on his image? But a mother's love is blind. Or maybe it chooses to blindfold itself, so it doesn't have to look at the cliff ahead. Saturday night came. I chose a pearl gray tailored suit I had sewn myself, from a fine Italian wool I had been saving for something special. I put on my pearl earrings, modest, but real, and picked up my old black leather purse, the one that had survived 1,000 battles, the one where I always kept my checkbook, just in case. I looked in the mirror and saw a dignified woman. I did not see a decrepit old lady. I saw Lutgarda, the businesswoman, the mother, the grandmother. When I walked into that restaurant, the air conditioning hit me like a cold slap. The place smelled of expensive perfume and new money. There was that constant murmur, clinking glasses, rehearsed laughter, the sound rich people make to fill uncomfortable silences. I saw Rogelio in the center of the room, gesturing dramatically to a group of men in dark suits and women who seemed to be competing over who wore more jewelry. My daughter-in-law, Estefania, stood beside him, smiling with the stiffness of someone wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. I walked toward them holding Valentina's gift, a small carved wooden box with a gold chain that had belonged to my grandmother inside. Not an iPad. Not a plastic toy. History. Legacy. "Good evening," I said, trying to make my voice sound warm despite the icy atmosphere around me. Rogelio turned. His eyes scanned me from head to toe. No kiss. No hug. Just a flicker of relief that I hadn't dressed like an old woman, as he liked to say with contempt. "Mom, you made it," he said, checking his watch. "Happy birthday to my little girl." I searched for Valentina, who was running between the tables in a pink tulle dress that looked like it was itching her skin. Yes, you'll say hi later," Rogelio cut me off, grabbing my arm with unnecessary force. "Listen, Mom, we have a logistics problem." A knot formed in my stomach. I knew that tone. It was the same tone he used as a teenager when he broke something valuable, or when he needed extra money in college and didn't know how to ask. But this time, his eyes showed no guilt. Only cold, calculated determination. He pointed to a long table decorated impeccably with white orchid centerpieces, sitting right in the middle of the room, under the biggest chandelier. "That's the main table," he explained, almost whispering so no one else would hear. "Mr. Montalvo will sit there, the bank director, the majority partners. Very influential people, Mom. People my promotion depends on. I need the conversation to flow. Business, politics, serious topics." I looked into his eyes, waiting for him to finish the sentence, even though my heart already knew what was coming. "And?" I asked, keeping my chin high. "Well, you know how you are. Sometimes you start telling stories from the past, about sewing for the neighborhood, about your fabrics, and honestly, that doesn't fit this crowd. I don't want you to feel uncomfortable if you don't understand what we're talking about." The humiliation rose in my throat like hot bile. Me, who negotiated contracts with international suppliers without knowing a word of English, using nothing but a calculator and instinct. Me, who built a business back when women needed their husband's permission to open a bank account. "So where do I sit, Rogelio?" My voice came out calmer than I felt inside. It was the calm before the storm. He pointed toward the back of the restaurant, near the swinging kitchen doors, where the clatter of dirty dishes never stopped and the lighting was dim. There sat a low, round table, surrounded by high chairs for babies, covered in juice stains and breadcrumbs. "Over there," he said without a hint of shame, "with the kids and the nannies. You'll be more comfortable. You can watch Valentina and her cousins. Plus, I ordered a kids menu for that table. Burgers and fries. Something simple you'll like more than the duck à l'orange we're serving here." The world stopped for a second. The noise of the restaurant became a distant hum. I looked at the main table with its shining glasses and silver cutlery. Then I looked at the table in the corner. The exile, the place where you hide what you don't want to show. My own son, my own blood, was banishing me. He was telling me, without saying the exact words, that I was an inconvenience, that my presence, my history, and my dignity were not worthy of his important adults. He was reducing me to a free babysitter, an invisible presence to be hidden next to the kitchen. I could have screamed. I could have slapped him right there in front of his precious partners, reminded him who wiped his nose and who paid for the Italian suit he was wearing. But Lutgarda doesn't make scenes. Lutgarda observes, processes, and acts when the moment is right. "Fine," I said. It came out as a dry whisper. Rogelio exhaled with relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I knew you'd understand, Mom. You're the best. I'll have them bring you a glass of house wine over there." He patted me condescendingly on the shoulder and turned to greet Mr. Montalvo with a shark smile. I walked to the table at the back. Every step hurt my soul. I felt the pity in the waiter's eyes, and that burned more than my son's contempt. There were 3 young nannies, immigrant girls who looked at me with surprise as an elegant woman sat down among the chaos of crayons and dirty napkins. "Good evening, ma'am," one of them said, making space. "Are you looking for one of the children?" "No, dear," I answered, setting my leather purse on a ketchup-stained chair. "I'm the birthday girl's grandmother. My seat is apparently here." The chair was uncomfortable, hard wood. But from my position, I had a perfect view of the main table. I watched Rogelio laugh with his mouth wide open at the banker's joke. I watched Estefania nervously pouring wine. I watched them toast. Nobody looked toward my corner. Not once. For the next 2 hours, I was a ghost at my own granddaughter's party. Valentina came by a couple of times, gave me a quick hug, and ran off again. The nannies, embarrassed by the situation, tried their best to take care of me. "Would you like something from the main menu?" one asked quietly. "That kid's menu is just frozen nuggets." "Don't worry," I said, smiling sadly. "I'll eat whatever they give me. Today I'm learning a lesson, and lessons sometimes go down with cold food." I ate fries that tasted like cardboard. And I watched. I watched my son's vanity. I watched how he bent over backward to impress people I knew, from experience, would forget him the moment they walked out the door. Rogelio was so busy being a man of the world that he forgot the woman who made him a man was sitting by the bathroom door. Time passed slow and thick. The humiliation settled in my chest, turning from sharp pain into cold, heavy stone. I did not cry. Women like me don't cry in public. I stored every detail, every gesture of contempt, every laugh that came from the main table. Finally, the bill arrived. The restaurant began to empty. The influential adults started saying their goodbyes. Rogelio, euphoric, stood up to shake hands and give hugs. The night seemed like a total success for him. "Put it all on my card," he shouted with that fake generosity in his voice. "It's been an honor having you all here." The headwaiter, a serious man in a black vest, approached with the leather folder containing the bill. Rogelio, without even glancing at the total, pulled out his golden credit card, the one he loved to show off, and placed it on the tray with a theatrical gesture. From my corner, among the dirty children's plates, I saw it all. I saw the arrogant confidence in his posture. I saw him loosen his tie, feeling like the king of the world. The waiter walked away and came back a few minutes later, but this time his steps were different. There was no deference in his walk, only the professional discomfort of someone bringing bad news. He leaned toward Rogelio's ear and whispered something. I watched my son's face change color. First red, then ashen gray. "Impossible," Rogelio exclaimed, loud enough for several heads to turn. "Run it again. That card has unlimited funds. It's a machine error." The waiter, unmoved, walked away and came back again. He shook his head gently. "I'm sorry, sir. Declined. The bank says insufficient funds, or a security hold. Do you have another form of payment?" Rogelio started sweating. I watched him dig through his wallet. He pulled out another card and handed it over with trembling hands. Mr. Montalvo and the other partners, who were about to leave, stopped. The atmosphere of success evaporated in an instant, replaced by a dense, humiliating silence. The second card was also declined. "Sir, the bill is significant," the waiter said, raising his voice slightly, losing patience. "It includes several bottles of champagne and the tasting menu for 12. We need to resolve this now." Rogelio looked at his wife. Estefania shook her head, terrified. She never handled money. He never allowed it. The influential friends started checking their watches, clearing their throats, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Nobody offered to help. Nobody reached for their wallet. They were rich, yes, but the kind of rich that never forgives the smell of failure on others. That was when Rogelio's desperate, panic-stricken eyes swept across the room searching for an escape, and found me. They found me, Lutgarda, sitting alone at the children's table, my old leather purse on my lap, a paper napkin in my hand. Our eyes met. In his, I saw the terror of a lost child in a supermarket. In mine, he must have seen something he didn't expect. There was no immediate compassion. No submissive mother rushing to save him. There was silence. I stood up slowly, smoothing my wool skirt. I picked up my purse with deliberate calm. I did not walk toward him. I stayed there, standing by the kitchen door, a statue of dignity in the middle of his disaster. He had seated me with the children because the influential adults were the ones who paid the bills and made the decisions. Well, now the influential adult couldn't even pay for the water. The waiter looked at Rogelio, waiting for an answer. Mr. Montalvo frowned, disappointed. "Rogelio, this is unusual," the banker said coldly. "I thought the firm's finances were solid." They are. It's just a system error." My son stammered, sweat running down his forehead. He looked at me again, pleading, his lips silently forming a word. "Mom." In that instant, I felt something break inside me for good. But I also felt something ancient and powerful wake up. The Lutgarda who built a business from nothing, the woman who owed nobody a single cent, was back. And that woman was never going to be treated like an old piece of furniture again. I held his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I did not run to rescue him. I stood still, gripping the handle of my purse, feeling the weight of my checkbook inside, the checkbook that could pay for that dinner 10 times over without blinking. But he had put me at the kids' table. And kids don't pay grown-up bills. That night didn't end in screaming or a soap opera scandal. I wish it had. Noise sometimes scares away demons. But silence feeds them. I stood up from that little table with my knees cracking more from rage than arthritis. and I walked toward where my son was falling apart in cold sweat in front of the waiter. "Excuse me," I said. My voice cracked like the snap of a dry whip. Rogelio stepped aside, almost gratefully, like a beaten dog yielding to its owner. I pulled out my checkbook from my purse, that old embossed leather checkbook he always looked at with disdain, calling it outdated, and with a steady pulse, without a single finger trembling, I wrote the amount. It was an obscene sum. Enough to feed an entire family for 3 months. I tore off the check and handed it to the waiter, completely ignoring my son's outstretched hand. "I apologize for the inconvenience, young man," I told the employee, looking him in the eye. "You can cash this. It has funds. My word is worth more than any golden piece of plastic." Mr. Montalvo, the influential banker, watched me with a raised eyebrow. There was curiosity in his gaze, and maybe a pinch of respect he had never given Rogelio all evening. "Dona Lutgarda," Montalvo said, finally recognizing me, perhaps remembering some old transaction from my glory days. "It's always a pleasure to see that elegance hasn't been lost in this city." I nodded slightly, a minimal bow, equal to equal. I did not look at Rogelio. I did not look at my daughter-in-law, who seemed to want to melt into the wallpaper. I turned around and walked out of Le Jardin without waiting for dessert, without saying goodbye to anyone, leaving behind the smell of cheap perfume and second-hand shame. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in my reading chair with a cup of tea that grew cold without me taking a single sip, and I stared into the darkness of my living room. The house was silent, but my mind was a screaming marketplace. How was this possible? Rogelio was a partner at a prestigious law firm. He lived in a house on the hills that looked like a castle. He changed cars every year. How could 2 cards be declined for insufficient funds? Not 1, but 2. Doubt is like termites. Small, silent, but capable of bringing down an oak beam if you give it time. And I did not intend to give it time. The next morning, Sunday, the sun came through the window with an almost offensive clarity. I washed my face with cold water and looked in the mirror. Dark circles marked my face, but my eyes, those black eyes I inherited from my father, shone with a dangerous clarity. The submissive mother had stayed behind at the children's table, stained with ketchup and neglect. The woman who woke up that morning was the Lutgarda who used to negotiate cotton prices on the docks, at 40 degrees in the shade. I went to my study, a room I had used for years only for sewing and keeping memories. I opened the old grey metal filing cabinet, the one Rogelio always said I should throw away and replace with something digital. There, among yellowing folders, was my financial life. Or at least what I believed was my financial life. I searched for a document I had signed 5 years earlier. I remembered it perfectly. A rainy afternoon, Rogelio had shown up with a notary friend of his at the house. "Mom, you're already 67. You don't need to keep going to the bank and standing in lines, or fighting with the warehouse tenants. Sign this general power of attorney for legal matters and administration. I'll take care of everything. You just rest. You deserve it." And I, foolish, sentimental old woman, trusted him. I signed. I handed over the keys to the kingdom to a prince who turned out to be nothing but a jester in an expensive suit. I picked up the phone. I did not call Rogelio. I called Jeremiah. Jeremiah was not an influential adult. He was a retired accountant, an 80-year-old man who wore suspenders, smoked cheap cigars, and had a mind sharper than a razor blade. He had kept the books for my textile factory for 3 decades. He was the only man on earth who knew the value of every cent I had ever earned. "Jeremiah," I said when he answered in his rough smoker's voice, "I need you to come over and bring your magnifying glass. We're going to look for fleas on a pedigree dog." He arrived an hour later with his worn leather briefcase and that unbreakable old-school loyalty. I served him black coffee and told him about the restaurant. I left out no detail. I told him about the table by the bathroom, the humiliation, the declined cards. Jeremiah listened in silence, nodding gravely. When I finished, he set his cup down with a soft clink. "Lutgarda," he said, looking at me over his bifocals. Money doesn't vanish by magic. If a lawyer at his level gets his cards bounced, it's because the hole is deeper than it looks. We need to check the property registry and the joint accounts. Do it, I ordered. I still have my old access codes. I never changed them, even though Rogelio told me they no longer worked. Let's see if that's true. We sat in front of my old desktop computer. It took forever to boot up, coughing like an old engine, but it worked. We logged into the bank portal. My hands, which had touched so many fine fabrics, now typed with restrained fury. What we found chilled my blood more than the restaurant's air conditioning. The savings accounts, the ones I had set aside for my old age and for Valentina's university education, were skeletal. Of a lifetime's savings, only crumbs remained. But that wasn't the worst part. Jeremiah, with his bloodhound skill, pulled up the property registry. I owned 3 important real estate assets. The house where I lived, the building of the old factory now rented out as industrial warehouses, and a small apartment by the beach. Good God, Lutgarda, Jeremiah whispered, turning pale. I leaned toward the screen, squinting to read the fine print. The warehouse building had 3 mortgages recorded in the last 4 years. 3. It was mortgaged down to its foundation. The money from those loans had gone into an account under a shell company called RNE Investments. Rogelio and Estefania. He's stealing from me, I said. The words left my mouth without emotion, as if I were reading a grocery list. My own son is stealing from me. He's not just stealing from you, woman, Jeremiah said, pointing to another line on the screen. Look at this. There's a preventive notice on your house. This house. I felt the floor open beneath me. My house. My refuge. The place where he took his first steps, where I cried over my divorce, where I sewed until dawn to pay for his degree. Has he put it up as collateral? I asked, my voice barely a thread. It looks like he tried to use it as security for a personal loan 2 weeks ago. The process is underway. If we don't stop it, within a month this house could belong to the bank if he stops paying. And from what we saw last night, he's already stopped paying. I sank back into my chair. The magnitude of the betrayal was physical. My joints ached. My chest ached. This wasn't just greed, it was contempt. Rogelio didn't just want my money. He didn't care if I ended up on the street. To him, I was already old furniture, something you can pawn to keep up your status, your dinners at Le Jardin, your Italian suits. He had seated me at the children's table because, in his mind, I no longer held any power. I was a dependent. A burden. Someone you can take everything from because you no longer need her. I closed my eyes for a moment. I pictured my son's face the night before, that fake smile, the way he pushed me aside. And then I pictured something else. I saw myself 30 years earlier, walking into the office of a sexist supplier who refused to sell me fabric on credit because I was a woman. I remembered how I slammed my hand on his desk and said, "You are going to sell to me, and you're going to give me the best price, because if you don't, I will buy the factory across the street and put you out of business." And I did it. I opened my eyes. There were no more tears. Only fire. "Jeremiah," I said, standing up. I felt taller. Immense. "What do we need to revoke the power of attorney?" "A notary we trust. Today is Sunday, but I know one who owes us a favor. Attorney Cabrera. Call him, and I want you to prepare a full audit. I want to know every last cent that RNE Investments has moved." "Lutgarda, this is going to be war," Jeremiah warned, though I saw a spark of excitement in his old eyes. "Rogelio is a lawyer. He knows the law. He'll fight like a cornered cat." I walked to the window and looked out at my garden. My rose bushes were trimmed. My bougainvillea bloomed. All of it was mine, and nobody, not even the blood of my blood, was going to take it from me. "He may know the law, Jeremiah," I answered, turning to face him with a smile that never reached my eyes. "But he forgot the most important law of all. Raise crows, and they'll peck out your eyes." He thinks I'm an old woman who knits socks. He forgot that I'm the one who taught him to walk, and now I'm going to have to teach him how to fall. I went to my bedroom and searched for something very specific. Not jewelry, not money. An old black-covered notebook I kept locked at the bottom of a drawer. In it, 4 years, I had recorded names, people I had helped in the past. Judges who started as poor interns and to whom I had gifted suits. Prosecutors whose careers I quietly supported. People who owed me favors. Rogelio had cocktail party influence, the kind that evaporates the moment a card gets declined. I had loyalty forged in iron and gratitude. I flipped through the pages with anxious fingers. There he was. Hector Villalobos. Now a magistrate. 25 years ago he was a brilliant but poor law student, whose thesis I paid for because his mother was my most faithful seamstress. Jeremiah, I said, walking back into the study with the notebook in hand. Prepare the revocation document, but we won't notify him yet. No, he asked, confused. No. The fox is easier to catch when he thinks the hens are asleep. We'll let him believe I'm still the foolish mother who sits wherever she's told. I want him to keep spending, keep moving money, keep believing the card incident was just a scare. I'm going to collect every forged signature, every illegal transfer. And when I have the noose ready around his neck, only then will I kick the stool out from under him. That afternoon, while Jeremiah made calls and organized papers, I brewed myself a strong coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sunset. The sky turned blood red and violet. My phone rang. It was Rogelio. I let it ring 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. My voice came out sweet, trembling, perfect. Hello, Mom. His voice sounded tense, but trying to be casual. Listen, I'm sorry about last night. It was a bank error, you know. Systems. I'll transfer you the money for the check tomorrow. A lie. He had nothing to transfer with. Don't worry, son, I said, amazed at my own capacity to act. I should have been an actress instead of a businesswoman. I know you have a lot of expenses. What matters is that Valentina had a good time. Yes, yes. Thanks for understanding, Mom. You're a saint. Oh, by the way, I need you to sign some papers tomorrow. Something routine about maintenance on the warehouse building. Can I come by? There it was. The audacity. The nerve. He wanted to make sure his source of income stayed tame. Of course, sweetheart, I answered, gripping the receiver until my knuckles turned white. Come for lunch. I'll make your favorite stew. Perfect, see you at 2. I hung up. The stew I was going to make him was going to be very hard to digest. I looked at my weathered hands. Those hands had cut thousands of yards of fabric. They knew how to use scissors. They knew how to separate what serves from what gets in the way. Sometimes, to save the garment, you have to cut away the rotten piece, even if it hurts, even if it bleeds. The submissive Lutgarda had died at the children's table in Le Jardin. The woman sitting on the porch now was the factory owner, the matriarch, the lioness who had just discovered her cub had turned into a flea. The plan was in motion. I had the information, I had Jeremiah, and I had my old black notebook. Rogelio wanted to play at being an influential man. Well then, his mother was about to teach him what real power looked like. Monday came under a leaden sky, the kind that promises a storm but somehow filled me with a strange calm. The house smelled of fresh coffee and wood polish, the same smell it had held for 40 years. But that morning the aroma had a different edge to it. It smelled like a trench. I woke before the sun, dressed with deliberate simplicity, a white cotton blouse, a wide black skirt, and went down to the kitchen. This was no time for silk or jewelry. This was time to roll up my sleeves. Jeremiah arrived punctually at 8 with his briefcase and a blue folder that seemed to weigh a ton. We didn't need to talk much. Years of working together had given us a language of glances that said everything. Everything is ready, Lutgarda, he said, setting the folder on the mahogany dining table. Attorney Cabrera expects us at 9:30. But I warn you, the moment we revoke the power of attorney, The bank will notify Rogelio. You'll have a very short window before your phone rings. I nodded as I poured him black coffee. My hands did not shake. I had spent the night sharpening my own weapons, mentally reviewing every step, every word I would say. They won't notify him today, I assured him, with a coldness that even surprised me. Today is Administrative Council Day at the central bank. The alert system for accounts like the one he thinks he holds has a 24-hour delay to avoid inconveniencing preferred clients. I know because I designed that clause myself 20 years ago, when I opened the corporate account. Jeremiah smiled sideways, a crooked grin around his unlit cigar. The devil knows more from being old than from being the devil. Let's go, I finished. The visit to the notary was surgical. Attorney Cabrera, a gray-haired man who owed me the favor of having saved his practice from bankruptcy in the 90s, received us without awkward questions. I signed the revocation document with a firm, almost aggressive stroke. The black ink on white paper felt like the sentence of a silent execution. With that signature, I took away Rogelio's key to my life. He could no longer sell, mortgage, or transfer a single cent without my explicit consent. But that wasn't enough. A document stops legality, but it doesn't stop greed. I needed him to come to me, to grow confident, to bare his neck willingly. Leaving the notary's office, I asked Jeremiah to take me to the courthouse. It was a gray, oppressive building downtown, a place I usually avoided, but that now was my chessboard. I pulled my small black notebook from my purse. Who are we going to see? Jeremiah asked, eyeing the building warily. Justice, Jeremiah. Or at least whoever administers it. Hector Villalobos. The magistrate received me in his private office 5 minutes after my name was announced. When he walked in, I saw the skinny boy whose thesis I paid for, now hidden under his robe and the extra weight the desk years give you. Dona Lutgarda, he said, kissing my hand with genuine reverence. It's an honor. My mother, may she rest in peace, always kept you in her prayers. Hector, I answered, sitting without waiting to be invited. I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to ask you to honor your mother's memory by doing what's right. I need a precautionary order, an asset freeze on suspicion of fraud and breach of trust. But I need it under sealed record for 48 hours. The magistrate frowned, his professional side wrestling with his personal gratitude. That's irregular, Dona Lutgarda. I need solid proof. I pulled from my purse the file Jeremiah had compiled the night before, copies of the mortgages on my properties, the transfers to RNE Investments, and most importantly, a forged document with my digital signature for a loan I never requested. Hector reviewed the papers. His face hardened. Outrage is universal when a mother has been betrayed. This is despicable, he murmured. I'll do it. I'll freeze everything. But Lutgarda, when this comes out, your son could go to prison. I looked into his eyes, and in that moment I felt my heart turn into a river stone, smooth and hard. He chose his own path, Hector. I'm only turning on the lights so he doesn't get lost in the dark he built himself. Do it. I left the courthouse with the feeling of having pulled the trigger of a silenced weapon. The bullet was already traveling, the sound just hadn't arrived yet. I got home just in time to set the stage. Rogelio would arrive at 2. I went into the kitchen and began preparing his favorite beef stew. I diced the carrots with precision, seared the meat in the iron pot, added the red wine. The aroma filled the house, a smell of home, of childhood, of safety. It was the perfect bait. At exactly 2, I heard his sports car in the driveway. I took off my apron, smoothed my hair, and sat in my usual armchair with knitting needles in hand, the picture of innocence. Rogelio walked in hurriedly, carrying a leather briefcase under his arm. He was sweating despite the air conditioning in his car. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for traps. "Mom," he exclaimed, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Something smells amazing. Sorry for the rush. I have a crazy afternoon at the firm." He leaned in to kiss my cheek. I felt his skin, cold and damp. He smelled of expensive cologne and rancid fear. "Sit down, son," I said, pointing to the sofa across from me. "Lunch is almost ready. Relax a little. You look shaken." "No, it's just stress." He loosened his tie. "Mom, about yesterday. I'm truly embarrassed. I already spoke with the bank. It was a massive computer glitch. I swear I'll pay you back today." "Oh, Rogelio, don't worry about that," I said, waving my hand as if shooing away a fly. "Money comes and goes. What worries me is you. You seem overwhelmed. Is work going well?" He tensed. I watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped the briefcase. "Yes, it's going excellent. Actually, that's why I came. I have a unique investment opportunity, something that would secure Valentina's future forever. But I need quick liquidity." There it was. The final thrust. It wasn't enough that he had already robbed me in secret. Now he came to ask me to open the front door so he could loot whatever was left. "Oh, really?" I asked, feigning interest, setting my knitting needles down on my lap. "Tell me." He pulled a folder from his briefcase, papers full of small print and tangled legal terms. "It's a real estate investment fund, very safe. But I need you to sign this authorization to use the warehouse building as collateral. It's just a formality, Mom. The building is still yours. It's just paper." I took the documents. My eyes, trained over decades of reading predatory supplier contracts, spotted the trap within seconds. It wasn't collateral. It was an irrevocable transfer of rights. If I signed, I would be handing over absolute ownership of the only asset that still generated real income. I could have screamed at him. I could have thrown the hot stew in his face. But I remembered the children's table. I remembered the humiliation. And I decided the punishment had to match the offense. I sighed, took off my glasses, and rubbed my eyes with a tired gesture. "Oh, son, this print is so small. I don't understand any of this anymore." "I'll explain it, Mom. You just need to sign here," he said, uncapping a fountain pen with impatience. "No, Rogelio," I said softly. He froze. Panic crossed his face. "What do you mean, no, Mom? This is for the family's good. I'm not saying I don't want to help you." I kept weaving my own net. "I mean, this is far too small. Why take out a loan on the warehouses when we could do something better?" He blinked, confused. "Greed is a stupid animal. It stops in its tracks at the shine of something bigger." "What do you mean?" I stood and walked to the window, my back to him. "I've been thinking, Rogelio. I'm already 72. Yesterday at the restaurant, I realized something. You sat me with the children because you see me as someone who no longer belongs in the world of business. And maybe you're right." I heard him stand up from the sofa, hopeful. "Mom, I didn't mean that. Let me finish. I've decided to retire completely. I want to sell everything, Rogelio. The warehouses, the beach house, even this house if necessary. I want to liquidate all my assets and put the money into a single account under your management, so you can handle it however you see fit, for your children's future." The silence in the room was absolute. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brain at full speed, calculating the number. We were talking about millions. Far more than the pathetic loan he had come to ask for. "Are you serious?" His voice trembled, a mix of disbelief and euphoria. "Completely. I'm tired of fighting with tenants and paying taxes. I want to rest. But I want to do it properly. I don't want to sign loose little papers. I want a full estate transfer." He walked over and hugged me. It was a fake, stiff hug. The hug of someone holding a sack of gold coins, not a mother. "This is the best decision, Mom. I promise I'll take care of that money." "I know, son," I said, returning the hug with the same falseness, feeling disgust as I noticed his heart racing with greed. "But there's one condition." He pulled back slightly. "Alert." "What is it?" I want to make it formal. I want you to invite your partners, that Mr. Montalvo, and your wife. I want to host a dinner here this Friday, and in front of everyone, I'll sign over the complete transfer of my assets. I want them to see that your mother trusts you, so you can rebuild your image after the card incident. Rogelio's eyes lit up. I was offering him not just the money, but the public redemption his ego craved. I was giving him the perfect stage for his vanity. It's perfect, Mom. You're amazing. He began gathering his things, completely forgetting about the warehouse transfer document. Why would he want crumbs when I had just promised him the whole cake? I'll organize everything. Estefania will be thrilled. Take the stew in a container, son, I told him. I've lost my appetite. He left 5 minutes later, floating on a cloud of anticipated triumph. I watched him from the window. I saw him dial a number on his phone before even starting the car, surely calling his wife to tell her the old woman had finally given in. When his car disappeared around the curve, Jeremiah walked out from the kitchen where he had been listening to everything. You're dangerous, Lutgarda, he said, shaking his head, though with an admiring smile. You just promised him heaven so he wouldn't see he's standing on a trap. Friday they'll all come, I said, sitting back down and picking up my knitting needles. Rogelio, Estefania, Montalvo. I need you to prepare the real documents, Jeremiah. Not the asset transfer. I want the printed audits, the copies of the illegal mortgages, and the judge's order. I want witnesses. When the bomb goes off, I don't want it to be my word against his. I want it to be the truth against his lies. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the old factory. Now it was rented out as warehouses, but I still kept the master keys. I walked through the aisles between stacked boxes. I touched an old iron column. I felt the vibration of the ghost machines that once roared there. Forgive me, I whispered to the walls. I had fallen asleep at the wheel. I had let the fox guard the henhouse. But I had woken up now. My phone buzzed. A text from the bank, an automatic alert to my old number, the one Rogelio believed inactive. Login attempt failed. Credentials revoked by account holder. I smiled in the dim light of the warehouse. Rogelio had gone to his office and tried to log into my accounts, to check the balance, to savor his future fortune. He would have found the door locked. He probably thought it was a system error, or that I, in my supposed senility, had changed something by accident. He wouldn't suspect anything serious, would he? Not when I had just promised him the entire kingdom on Friday. The trap was set. The bait had been swallowed. Now all that remained was to wait. The following days, I played my role to perfection. Rogelio called constantly, sugary, attentive. He asked if I needed anything, if I wanted a car sent over. I answered in a trembling, grateful voice. I told him my dress was ready. I told him I was anxious. And I was anxious to see his face when he discovered that the children's table he had exiled me to was actually the judge's bench. Thursday night, Jeremiah came by one last time before the event. He brought a sealed cardboard box. Here's everything, Lutgarda. The forensic accounting report is devastating. He's diverted nearly 4 million pesos in 3 years. Magistrate Villalobos's order takes effect tomorrow at 8 a.m. sharp. His personal accounts and the ones from the partnership with Estefania will wake up frozen, and mine, armored. We already transferred everything to a new trust under your exclusive control this morning. When he tries to make the transfer Friday during dinner, he'll find the source accounts don't exist. I ran my hand over the cardboard box. It was heavy. It carried the weight of a son's betrayal. It hurt, of course it hurt. I felt a tearing in my belly, the same place where I carried him for 9 months. But the pain no longer paralyzed me. It drove me forward. Thank you, old friend, I told Jeremiah. Are you sure you can go through with this? He asked, worried by my somber expression. He's your son, Lutgarda. What you're about to do will destroy him, socially and professionally. I looked out the window into the dark garden. I remembered the contempt in Rogelio's eyes when his card was declined. I remembered how he pointed me to the dirty table by the bathroom. I remembered that he showed no mercy toward me. He didn't think of me when he stole from me, Jeremiah. He didn't think of his mother when he put this house at risk. He killed the son I raised a long time ago. The man coming to dinner tomorrow is a stranger who tried to take advantage of an old woman. And strangers who steal answer to the law. I went to bed but did not sleep. I lay listening to the silence of the house, counting the hours. Tomorrow, the matriarch would serve dinner, and the main course would be the truth. Served cold. Very cold. Friday night fell over my house like a heavy velvet blanket, suffocating, but necessary to conceal the trap I had woven myself. I dressed with ritual calm, choosing an ivory silk blouse and a sober black skirt, almost monastic. I wore no jewelry except my wedding ring, the one Rogelio always eyed with greed, thinking of melting it down, but which for me was a reminder that even promises made before God can break if you don't guard them. The dining table was set with the fine china I only used at Christmas. The silver cutlery gleamed under the candlelight, sharp as scalpels waiting for flesh. I had made the mole with my own hands, grinding the spices, the chocolate, the chiles until they formed a thick, dark sauce, as complex as my family's history, as bitter and sweet as the revenge I was about to serve. At 8 sharp, the doorbell rang. Rogelio entered first, exultant, a smile splitting his face in two. He carried an exaggeratedly large bouquet of flowers, the kind sold on street corners out of obligation, wrapped in noisy cellophane. Behind him, Estefania walked with short steps, squeezed into a designer dress probably charged to one of my cards before Judge Villalobos froze everything that very morning. And finally, Mr. Montalvo, the banker, in his impeccable grey suit, with that shark's gaze that smells blood in the water. Mom. Rogelio approached with open arms, invading my personal space with his scent of expensive cologne and ambition. You look beautiful. I brought these flowers for the most generous woman in the world. I accepted the bouquet with a nod. The flowers were already wilting from the heat, a perfect metaphor for his affection. Thank you, son, I said, and my voice came out serene, steady. I had rehearsed this moment in front of the mirror until my eyes learned to lie. Come in, please. Dinner is ready. Mr. Montalvo, it's an honor to have you in my humble home. The honor is mine, Dona Lutgarda, the banker answered, kissing my hand with gallantry. Rogelio has told me wonderful things about your decision. It's admirable that a woman your age knows when to pass the torch. Pass the torch. I thought as I led them to the dining room. They believed I was going to hand them fire to warm themselves, without knowing I would use it to burn their lies. We sat down. Rogelio took the head of the table, the seat that had belonged to his father and that I had kept empty out of respect. Tonight, I gave it to him. I wanted him to feel like the king, the patriarch, the owner of everything. Estefania sat to his right, nervous, fidgeting with her napkin. I sat at the far end, distant, watching the scene with the coldness of a coroner. I served the mole. The aroma of chocolate and spice filled the room. This smells delicious, mother-in-law, Estefania said, trying to break the ice. Nobody cooks like you. It's an old recipe. It requires patience, I answered, spooning a generous portion over Montalvo's chicken. If you rush it, it burns. If it lacks time, it tastes raw. You have to know how to wait for the exact moment for everything to come together. Rogelio ate anxiously, almost swallowing without chewing, talking non-stop, filling the silence with grandiose plans. With the asset merger we'll do today, he said, mouth half full, addressing Montalvo, we'll be able to leverage the purchase of those lots up north. Mom was always very conservative with money, very much about hiding it under the mattress. But modern times demand aggression, right, Arturo? Montalvo nodded, wiping the corner of his mouth. Static capital loses value, Rogelio. Your mother does well trusting your vision. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, every foolish word from my son. I let him talk. I let him build castles in the air. I let him show off a fortune he could no longer touch. Mom, Rogelio said when we finished the main course, pushing his plate forward impatiently. I know we're enjoying ourselves, but Arturo has an early flight tomorrow, and I'd like to proceed with the signatures. I brought the notary from my office. He's waiting in the car. I'll have him come in. There's no need to bother the notary yet, I said, wiping my lips with the linen napkin. First, coffee and dessert. But Mom. Rogelio shifted in his seat, irritated. The process is quick. It's just a few signatures. Haste is a bad advisor, son. Besides, there's one small detail we should review before signing over the total transfer of my assets. I stood. The sound of my chair scraping against the wooden floor echoed like a gunshot in the room. I walked to the antique sideboard behind me. On it, there was no dessert. There was a gray cardboard box, the one Jeremiah had handed me. I took it in my hands. It was heavy. I carried it to the table and let it drop in the center, pushing aside the dead flower centerpiece Rogelio had brought me. The dull thud made the crystal glasses rattle. Rogelio frowned. Estefania stopped smiling. Montalvo adjusted his glasses, intrigued. What is this, Mom? Rogelio asked with a nervous laugh. Your old photo albums? No, Rogelio, I said, opening the box and pulling out the first bundle of documents. These are the real account statements for RNE Investments. The color drained from my son's face in a single second. It was as if someone had switched off the light beneath his skin. He turned ashen, waxy. Estefania let out a small strangled gasp and covered her mouth with her hand. What are you talking about? He stammered, trying to keep his composure in front of Montalvo. Mom, please, don't start with your confusion. We already talked about this. I'm not confused, son. I pulled out another document, the copy of the warehouse mortgage with the forged signature. And I'm not senile either. Like you told the bank manager last month, to get access to my safety deposit box. I slid the paper across the table until it stopped in front of Montalvo's plate. The banker picked it up, looked at Rogelio, and his expression shifted from courtesy to professional suspicion. What does this mean? Montalvo asked, holding up the document. This is a mortgage on the Lutgarda Textiles industrial lot. The signature is fake. A handwriting expert certified it yesterday, I interrupted, my voice cutting. And that money, Mr. Montalvo, 4 million pesos, wasn't used to modernize the company, as my son surely told you. It was used to pay gambling debts, trips to Europe, and the sports car parked in my driveway. Rogelio shot up from his chair, knocking it over. Enough! He shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. You're crazy, Arturo. Don't listen to her. She's old. She doesn't know what she's saying. Those papers prove nothing. Sit down. Sit down, I ordered. I did not shout. I did not raise my voice more than necessary. But the tone I used was the same one I used to control 100 factory workers during a strike. A tone of absolute authority, forged iron. Sit down right now, Rogelio. Startled by the force of my command, he hesitated. His eyes moved from me to the papers, searching for an exit. There wasn't one. You sat me at the children's table last Saturday, Rogelio, I continued, staring straight into his eyes, drilling into his soul. You humiliated me because you thought I no longer mattered, that my money was yours by right, that I was just an inconvenience who should eat nuggets by the bathroom. Well, now we're at the adult table. And at this table, the bills get paid. I pulled out the final document, Judge Villalobos's order. This morning at 8 o'clock sharp, Magistrate Hector Villalobos issued a precautionary order, I explained, savoring every syllable. All your accounts are frozen, Rogelio. Yours, Estefania's, your shell companies. Everything. Estefania burst into hysterical, ugly crying. Rogelio, I told you she'd figure it out. I told you we couldn't do this, she screamed, unwittingly betraying him in her panic. "Shut up, you idiot," Rogelio snapped at her, losing all pretense of the elegant man. He turned to me, eyes bloodshot. "What did you do, Mom? You can't do this to me. I'm your son. I have commitments. If Montalvo finds out my assets are frozen." "Mr. Montalvo already knows," I said, pointing to the banker, who had discreetly stood and was putting his phone back in his pocket. Montalvo looked at Rogelio with absolute contempt, the cold disgust that only people of money have for failed con men. "Rogelio," the banker said, straightening his jacket, "the bank doesn't do business with people under investigation for family fraud. Consider our partnership over. As for the firm's credit line, well, you'll receive the cancellation notice tomorrow." "No, Arturo, wait." Rogelio tried to approach him, but Montalvo stepped back as if my son carried leprosy. "Dona Lutgarda," the banker said, bowing his head toward me with a new, fearful respect. "I deeply regret having been part of this farce. You have my admiration, and my apologies." Montalvo walked out of the dining room, and I heard the front door close seconds later. The sound of that closing door was final. We were left, the three of us, in the dining room. The silence that followed was dense, heavy with my son's ruin. Rogelio collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at his half-finished plate of mole. He looked like a small child, one who has broken the most expensive vase in the house and knows there's no glue in the world that can fix it. "Why?" he whispered, his voice broken. "Why are you destroying me like this? I was going to pay you back. I just needed time. Time ran out the moment your card was declined and you looked at me with shame," I answered, walking toward him. "I'm not destroying you for the money, Rogelio. Money comes and goes. I built my fortune from nothing, and I could build it again. I'm destroying you because you underestimated me. Because you forgot who I am." I leaned over the table, resting my weathered hands on the linen tablecloth. "You stole from me. You forged my signature. You put your mother's roof at risk. And on top of it all, you had the nerve to invite me to an expensive place to show off with my money and hide me in a corner. Mom, forgive me." He began to cry. Tears of fear, not remorse. He cried for his future, not for my pain. "Forgiveness is for God, Rogelio," I said, straightening up, feeling immense, powerful, free. "I am only your mother, and as your mother, my duty is to raise you. You didn't learn with love, so now you'll learn with pain." I pulled one last paper from the box. It wasn't a legal document. It was a check. A modest amount. "Here." I slid it toward him. He looked at it, confused, his eyes clouded. "What is this?" "Enough money for you to hire a mediocre lawyer and find yourself a small rental apartment. Because the house on the hill is under a company I controlled, and I just dissolved it. You have a week to move out." Estefania let out a wail. "You can't throw us out. We have children, your grandchildren." "My grandchildren will always have the doors of this house open," I cut her off with an icy stare. "They can live here with me whenever they want. You two have lost that privilege." Rogelio looked at the check, then at me. In his eyes I saw pure hatred, the hatred of a parasite ripped from its host. But I also saw fear. A lot of fear. He knew I had the proof to send him to prison if I wanted to. He knew this was my mercy, and that it was a cruel mercy. "You're a witch," he spat through his teeth. I smiled. It was a sad smile, but full of dignity. "No, son. I'm a businesswoman, and I just closed the branch that was only running losses." I walked toward the dining room door. My legs no longer hurt. The arthritis seemed to have disappeared under the adrenaline of justice. "Get out of my house," I said without turning to look at them. "And take the dead flowers with you. I don't want them." I climbed the stairs to my room. I heard Estefania's choked screams, Rogelio's insults, chairs scraping across the floor. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I entered my room and locked the door. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. I watched them leave the house. Defeated. Hunched over. Rogelio threw the bouquet of flowers to the ground and stomped on it in rage before getting into his sports car. The same car the bank would probably repossess the next day. They drove off, leaving behind a trail of smoke and failure. I stood there in the darkness of my room, listening to my own heartbeat. It hurt, of course it hurt. I felt as if a limb had been torn from me without anesthesia. I had destroyed my own son. But looking at my hands, those old hard-working hands, I knew I had done the only thing I could do to save what was left of my dignity and my legacy. I had reclaimed my name. I had reclaimed my respect. And even though the house was empty and silent, for the first time in years, I felt like the air was mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, and then, yes, I allowed a single tear to roll down my cheek. It was not a tear of weakness. It was the last drop of poison leaving my body. "Goodbye, Rogelio," I whispered to the empty room. "Let life teach you what I couldn't." The Buffet fired Rogelio the very next morning. Mr. Montalvo pulled his investments and word spread fast. In the world of finance, reputation is more fragile than glass, and my son had shattered his into 1,000 pieces. The friends he had been so desperate to impress vanished like roaches when the light comes on. Nobody lent him money. Nobody offered him a couch. Those influential adults he had scorned me for wouldn't even answer his calls. I had to be present for the eviction from the house on the hill. I didn't want to, but I needed to make sure nothing that belonged to my grandchildren's real inheritance disappeared. I saw Estefania on the sidewalk, surrounded by designer suitcases, crying with the theatrical desperation of someone who has lost her stage, not her home. Rogelio was loading boxes into a rented moving van, sweating, his shirt stained, his eyes hollow. He no longer looked like the successful lawyer. He looked like a man defeated by his own greed. When he saw me step out of the car, he stopped. There was a suspended moment where I thought he might come scream at me again, insult me once more. But he didn't. He lowered his head. The shame, for the first time, was real. "The grandmother's jewelry stays," I said, pointing to a case Estefania was trying to hide in her bag. "And the paintings from the study too. All of that is family inventory, not yours." Estefania looked at me with venom but handed over the case without argument. She knew I had the power to leave her with absolutely nothing if they pushed me. "Where will you go?" I asked, more out of morbid curiosity than genuine interest. "An apartment downtown," Rogelio murmured, not meeting my eyes. "It's what we can afford with what you left us." It was the same kind of neighborhood where I had started my own business 50 years ago. The irony was so sweet it almost turned bitter. "It'll do you good, son," I told him. "There, people actually work. Maybe some of it will rub off on you." His marriage, built on appearance and reckless spending, did not survive the weight of reality. Estefania left him 3 months later, running off with an older man, a wealthy rancher from up north looking for a trophy wife, even a slightly used one. Rogelio was left alone in his small apartment, dealing with lawsuits and personal debts I refused to cover. I could have felt guilty. Many nights, sitting in my reading chair, I heard the ghost of the self-sacrificing mother whispering that I should rescue him, that I should write a check and end his suffering. But then I would remember the table by the bathroom. I would remember the pitying looks of the waiters. And above all, I would remember that love without limits raises tyrants. If I rescued him now, he would never learn. If I lifted him off the ground, his own legs would never grow strong. So I let him fall, and while he fell, I began to fly. With my accounts restored and full control of my estate back in my hands, I found myself with something I hadn't had in years: time and energy. I was 72, yes, but my mind was sharper than ever, and my heart, freed from the weight of betrayal, beat with force. I didn't want to be the old woman who takes cruises and plays cards. I am Lutgarda, the woman of fabrics, of textures, of creation. I went back to the old factory, the same warehouses Rogelio had let rot and tried to illegally mortgage. I walked in one Monday morning with a team of architects and contractors. "What would you like to do here, Dona Lutgarda?" the engineer asked, looking at the leaks and the peeling walls. Selling the land would fetch a good price, wouldn't it? I answered, running my hand over an old industrial sewing machine forgotten in a corner. I want to rebuild. But not just another factory. I want to build a school. And that is how the Silver Threads project was born. I transformed that abandoned place into a textile design and manufacturing center, but not for the wealthy. It was a cooperative for women over 50 and single mothers. Women that society, and sometimes their own children, had discarded as useless or old. I invested a considerable part of my fortune into it. We bought modern machinery, repaired the roofs, filled the place with light and colorful fabrics. I designed the curriculum myself. I taught cutting, pattern making, negotiating with suppliers, my specialty, and how to sell. Watching that place fill with life was my true revenge. Watching women my age, who arrived hunched and sad, straighten their backs the moment they finished their first garment and sold it, that was the best medicine for my soul. They were like me. Survivors. And together we were unstoppable. A year after that infamous dinner, we officially opened the center. There was press, there were guests, there were appetizers. But this time, nobody sat me at the children's table. I stood at the podium, cutting the red ribbon with a pair of golden ceremonial scissors. Among the crowd, I saw a familiar face. It was Rogelio. He had changed. He wore a simple, cheap suit, and gray hairs he used to dye now showed through. He had lost weight. He worked now as a legal advisor for a small union, earning a modest but honest salary. He lived alone, saw his children on weekends, and according to Valentina, he had learned to cook. Our eyes met. There were no smiles, but there was no hatred either. There was a silent recognition. He knew why I had done what I did, and I knew he was finally, at last, beginning to become a man. When I stepped down from the podium, he approached me shyly. "Congratulations, Mom," he said. His voice was soft, without the arrogance of before. "This place is incredible." "Thank you, Rogelio." There was an awkward silence, but not a tense one. "I brought you this." He handed me a small envelope. I opened it. It was a check for 2,000 pesos. A ridiculous amount compared to the millions he had stolen from me, but significant for his current situation. "It's the first payment," he said, looking at his shoes. "I know it will take me a lifetime to pay back what I took, but I want to start." I looked at the check, then at him. I saw his hands, which now had a few calluses. I saw his eyes, which no longer burned with gold fever, but held the calm of honest exhaustion. "Keep it, Rogelio," I said, handing the envelope back. "No, Mom, please, I need to do this. For my dignity." That word, dignity. The same one I had defended with tooth and nail. I smiled, and this time the smile reached my eyes. "All right," I accepted the envelope and tucked it into my purse. "I'll deposit it into Valentina's savings account." "But I accept the gesture." "Thank you," he whispered. Then he cleared his throat, trying to contain the emotion. Do you think one day I could come back to the main table?" I thought about it for a moment. I remembered the pain, the humiliation. But I also remembered that justice had already been served, and that mercy, when it arrives after the lesson is learned, can be healing. "The main table is earned, son," I answered, placing a hand on his shoulder. I felt him tremble at the touch. "Keep working like this. Keep being a present father for your kids. And maybe at Christmas, we can set an extra place. But I make no promises. You'll have to bring dessert, and make sure your card actually goes through to pay for it." He let out a short, dry, but genuine laugh. "Understood, boss." He walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I watched him go, and I did not feel the old anguish. I felt peace. I had gotten my son back, not the spoiled child who believed the world owed him everything, but the man who was rebuilding himself from the ruins. That night, I went home to the house on the hill. I was alone, but I no longer felt lonely. I poured myself a glass of red wine and went out to the garden. The air smelled of wet earth. I sat in my wicker chair and thought about all the women who, like me, have been pushed aside, silenced. I thought of the grandmothers who eat in the kitchen so as not to bother anyone. The mothers who hand over their savings out of guilt. The wives who endure contempt out of fear of loneliness. I had been there. I had been that woman sitting by the bathroom door, eating cold fries while everyone else raised their glasses. But I stood up. And in standing up, I changed the world around me. I learned that old age is not a sentence to invisibility. It is armor forged by experience. I learned that money is a tool, but respect is the true capital. And above all, I learned that there is no greater love than self-love, because without it, we cannot love anyone else. I looked at the full moon above my garden, bright, complete, imposing in the darkness. At 73 years old, my life was not ending. It was just truly beginning. I no longer sewed to survive. I sewed to teach others how to fly. I was no longer Rogelio's mother, the rich lawyer's mother. I was Lutgarda, the founder, the teacher, the woman who refused to become old furniture. I raised my glass to the stars and toasted to myself, to the woman I had been, and to the woman I had become. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many empty chairs are at your table. What matters is that you are the one sitting at the head of your own life, chin up, heart steady. And if anyone ever tries to seat you with the children again, remember, you bought the table. You cooked the dinner. And you hold the power to turn out the light. Never surrender your seat again.